Welcome to the Aerospace Advantage podcast. I'm your host, John Baum. Here on the Aerospace Advantage, we speak with leaders in the DoD, industry, and other subject matter experts to explore the intersection of strategy, operational concepts, technology, and policy when it comes to air and space power. So if you like learning about aerospace power, you are in the right place. To our regular listeners, welcome back. And if it's your first time here, thank you so much for joining us. As a reminder, if you like what you're hearing today, do us a favor and follow our show. Please give us a like and leave a comment so that we can keep charting the trajectories that matter to you most. I cannot overstate how excited I am for today's conversation. If there is one leader across the entire United States Air Force who is really calling it like it is, leaning into solving tomorrow's challenges, and pushing it up all the way, it's Air Mobility Commander General Mike "Mini" Minihan. Those of you who work for him or have seen him on stage at venues like AFA's Air, Space, and Cyber Conference know exactly what I mean. His passion, integrity, and acumen for the air mobility mission is absolutely awesome. And we need his drive right now. I mean, let's face it, ever since the Cold War, we all knew air mobility was important, but it sort of evolved into a corporate model, except the jets were gray and the crews wore flight suits. And I don't mean that as an insult. Folks in this community are working super hard. They were the lifeblood of every operation from Desert Storm and Kosovo to Afghanistan and Iraq. However, given that the threat wasn't very high, people could focus on hauling the mail through a lens that promoted efficiency and routine ops versus a system that was pressed to the brink amidst overwhelming demand signals and an aggressive, highly capable adversary. We are looking at two starkly different eras, and making that transition wasn't easy. And that's why I'm convinced General Minihan will go down in history as one of the most important leaders who guided the enterprise through a crucial series of reforms to meet what tomorrow will demand. He will be remembered as a seminal air mobility leader and, more broadly, a key air power figure given what air mobility will mean for tomorrow's fight. Well, joining me today for our conversation is another key air power figure, Mitchell Institute Dean, Lieutenant General David Deptula. Sir, always a pleasure to have you.
Hey, Slick, glad to be here. And you're right. General Minihan's perspective is exactly what the Air Force needs today. Now, I've known a lot of air power leaders over the years, and he really stands out. The Air Force cannot thank him enough for what he's done.
Well, sir, I couldn't agree more. And even as a retired guy, seeing and hearing him speak about air power, it just gets you fired up. And so we are so glad to have him here. And so, General Minihan, your perspective is exactly what the Air Force needs. And we're just so honored to host you today. So thanks for being here.
Well, it's a pleasure and honor to be amongst two world-famous fighter pilots, certainly a world-famous institute named after the original air power mutineer. You know, I can't think of a better way to spend a Tuesday, and I'll try my hardest not to let you both down.
Well, that's not going to happen, General Minihan. Now, to start things off, could you paint a picture for our audience regarding the responsibility AMC crews are shouldering these days? Just a bit to elaborate it, AFA's recent warfare symposium, you referenced air mobility as the most relied upon force in the history of warfare. What did you mean by that? And a bit of elaboration, please.
Certainly. You know, I think the basics when it comes to Air Mobility Command are certainly really the four core mission areas that we provide for this country. And indeed, the like-minded partners and allies that are abundant throughout this world. But, we provide airlift, air refueling, air medical evacuation, and then global air mobility support system, which is all the stuff on the ground that has to be in place to make the magic happen. We execute 24/7, 365 from a global perspective, and we don't exist for ourselves. We absolutely exist for others. So when I make a statement like the most relied upon force in the history of warfare, and you heard me at AFA, I'm begging someone to challenge me on that. I'm certainly not the greatest intellect, but as I view the landscape, when you lay those four mission sets out over the challenge that comes with what our elected officials have said is the greatest challenge, which is the China challenge in the Pacific region, then now more than ever, we become that most relied upon force. So you've seen it demonstrated routinely. I'll just go back to just prior to taking command, the retrograde from Afghanistan, the evacuation of Kabul, the support for Ukraine, the response to Israel, and now airdropping in Gaza, as important and as significant as those are, they pale in comparison to the challenge that awaits us in the Pacific. So I don't make that statement to be arrogant and try to be, show center in the discussion, nor do I say it from a position seeking sympathy. I say it from a simple perspective of everybody else's success depends upon us, and that the shoulders of the mobility airmen will carry the weight of effort to maneuver the exquisite capabilities of the joint force into a position of advantage so that they can be lethal, extremely lethal, to meet that challenge. I hope it never happens. I'm not saying it's inevitable. The good news is the same readiness that drives deterrence also drives decisive victory. So I came in, on the heels of the Kabul evacuation with 10 years experience in the Pacific. And you both know this, but you can't understand the Pacific until you've served there. You can't know the tyranny of distance and the tyranny of water, which I think is the more significant of the tyrannies that exist there, until you've strapped on a jet and flown 10, 12, 15 hours and not seen land. And so, that intersection is both a call to arms to the mobility force, a call to arms to, my internal blue-suited partners in the Air Force, and then a call to arms to the Joint Force, certainly, on how we need to prepare together to provide that maneuver element so that we can be lethal and successful moving forward. So that's the depth behind it. Nobody's challenged me on that statement, sir. So I'm waiting for it, and maybe it'll come in terms of helping me improve the perspective, or maybe it won't in terms of congruence of thought that we can move the Air Force team, the joint team, and the coalition team forward together to be in a position of advantage. That's exactly where we want to go. Over.
Yeah, I think it's a good response. I don't think anyone's going to challenge you on that. And you're talking about crossing the Pacific, been there, done that from my own time, multiple hours, and couldn't do it in my trusty F-15C without the tankers being there. So, everything you say is spot on. And I think we'll hear some impacts with respect to all of that a little bit later on. JB?
Good.
Yeah, and of course, sir, like you said, we've been there on the 11-hour sorties being dragged across the Pacific from Hawaii to Australia. And, you just can't do it without our AMC folks helping us out. And sir, one of the realities facing the AMC crews, though, is this notion of concurrent demand across the globe. And air mobility is a constant requirement everywhere, all the time. There's no day off, yet you have a finite number of crews and aircraft. So could you please talk us through, what's involved with constantly being in demand at such a high level?
Right. Multiple levels of being ready here. The first is that we do exist for others. So, we are constantly in tune with the ebb and flow of the demand signal as the globe does what the globe does. So if you're back during Mobility Guardian, and I know we're going to talk about that later over the summer, where we carved out airplanes to occupy, the key terrain in the Pacific, to actually fly in the potential battle skies, to appreciate the tyrannies of distance, the tyranny of water. We didn't stop everything else. We still supported all the combatant commands. We still responded to multiple weather events that were catastrophic. We still took the president to the NATO summit. So there's nothing that get paused when we do those things. When it comes to just what's happening today, in the middle of the continued support for Ukraine, in the middle of the continued support for Israel, in the middle of an evolving airdrop mission, which partnering with AFCENT and the AMC crews has been really effective and will most likely continue. And then here I am looking at Haiti, and whatever that option is, or, whatever that crisis is going to play out, you're tracking the Niger as that, those politics are playing out, all have enormous equities for the mobility team. So we have never known a day in our life where demand did not exceed supply. So our AOC is much different. We support kill chains, and our chain is a little bit different as we maneuver the force that needs to be maneuvered. It's 24/7, it's 365, it's global in nature, it's always on We don't wait for augmentation. It's fully manned each and every day for what it needs to do. It's certainly, we have crises that add to that. But the point is we are designed to handle that and deal with the competing priorities. And that's a messy business. And so there is always somebody whose priority's not getting served, who we need to keep on the radar and go back and reattack and reservice that target, if you will, while we're servicing, whatever the tyranny of the urgent is delivering us. So what you have is an incredibly nimble team. You have an incredibly agile team. You have a team that can speak the joint language to each of our service partners. They understand the nuances between the components in different combatant commands. They understand the partners and allies piece. They understand the diplomatic piece. They understand the commercial piece. Just an incredibly talented, gifted, motivated, passionate team that makes it work for America each and every day. And as awesome as it is what I just described, it needs improvement. So we can never be satisfied with the status quo. So, we're driving enormous levers here to try to get our platforms on step, to get them to the place that they need to be so that the joint team can be successful. And that step is a pretty aggressive one right now. So as amazing as our AOC is, it's a bit left behind when it comes to the connectivity and some of the improvements that the other AOCs have experienced. When it comes to the platforms that we fly, and I know we're going to get into it later, we're 4 generations behind, what's out, 5th and 6th generation, when it comes to perhaps an NGAD or a B-21. I'm not saying my team needs to be 6th generation, but I am saying that my team needs to not be 4 generations behind. If we're not careful, we're going to handicap the whole joint effort to the lowest common denominator of generation, and that's going to be generation 2. I'm still flying the second tanker that this nation has ever built. The second tanker that this nation ever built. And so there's 2 analogies I can use here to get people on board with that. Imagine if we were operating the 2nd generation of airplane or ship or frigate that this nation has ever built. You might not like that because we're going to go back to nonsensical stuff in the 1700s. Okay. But even if you go back to the 50s and you say, take your frontline fighter of the 1950s, take your frontline frigate of the 1950s, take your frontline tank of the 1950s. Okay. That's probably a more apt analogy, and that should probably connect with more people, that we need to giddy up the mobility force so that it's actually a force multiplier and not a force decrement when it comes to employing the lethality that needs to be employed. Over.
No, that's really well done, General. Now, as Slick explained in his introduction, the notion of readiness over the past 2 decades of operations in Afghanistan and Iraq is different than what tomorrow's missions are going to demand in places like the Pacific or what we see in a fight like what's going on in Europe today. Readiness is especially important given air mobility's role in deterring adversaries. So could you talk a bit on how you assess the notion of readiness in your command?
Yeah, it's a great question, sir. When I go through that operational lens, the real ops that the world delivered us, from 2021 forward, where, the retrograde of Afghanistan, the Kabul evacuation, Ukraine, Israel, Gaza, right? And then I overlay that with the exercise template, right? And you talk about, Mob Guard 21 performed over the skies of the continental United States, to Mob Guard 23 performed in the battle skies of the Pacific, Bamboo Eagle, which went down in January off the coast of California, and then potentially Bamboo Eagle coming up here in the summer. Those are all opportunities for me to assess the readiness. Here's the readiness I'm trying to drive. And, got multiple documents which I use as, unity of effort functions within my tribe. Okay. Starting off with my very first strategy, which came out in early 22, to the Mobility Manifesto, to the Beyond the Manifesto, attempts to unify the force in a common course of action, a common understanding of the problem, a common understanding on the path to solve it, and really try to accelerate the change needed to get after the readiness that this country needs its mobility force to be in to be successful. And probably the easiest way to describe it, sir, is we are going to have to explode into theater. That is going to demonstrate America's will and America's readiness. So exploding a continental-based force into theater in a fashion that any potential adversary looks at it and says, I don't want any piece of that. It's too ready. It's too nimble. It's too agile. It's too in my face that I did not expect it to be that way. So, especially when you look at those operational lenses and you say, hey, man, divorce yourself from the politics and the anxiety that comes with investing essentially my professional life in the Middle East and specifically Afghanistan. Only America can do what we did in those 17 days. And only American air power can do what was done in those 17 days. And only American mobility air power could do what was done in those 17 days. So we got to take a lot of pride in that, but we also have to take the absolute value and say, as amazing as those feats of courage and feats of strength were, they don't at all compare to what will be required readiness-wise in a near-peer fight in the Pacific. So this explode into theater, okay, not just with the mobility force, but with the joint team, the global strike team, the NORTHCOM equities, the STRATCOM equities, the other combatant command equities that come in. Can we explode into theater? Can we establish the hubs and spokes? And then can we operate at a tempo that delivers victory? And those things are separate and distinct, yet they're intertwined in a way that, make it so that if any one of those fail, then the joint force fails. So that readiness, is really what we're driving for. And it's much different than the individual, operations that I laid out earlier. So I know we're going to talk about MoBGuard a little bit later, but we specifically designed that exercise to tweak that readiness. Can I deliver the mission type orders so that the young captains and the tech sergeants out there know what to do without being told? Do they understand how to seek situational awareness, seek integration, and seek mission without being told? Do they understand how to take risk? Do they understand how to mitigate risk? Do they understand how to own risk moving forward? How do we detach ourselves from the numbness of almost 3 decades in the sand, where we're very entrenched in a very permissive environment, and I'm not saying that it was non-permissive at times, but where our lines of communication were essentially uncontested from the word go, into an environment where every line of communication is contested across multiple lines of domain, where you will be contested from just trying to get out of the mainland and trying to get into theater. All those things are going to fall onto amazingly talented, motivated young officers in an enlisted corps that have got to figure this out now. If we wait to do this while the kinetic actions are happening, we're going to expose ourselves to an enormous amount of risk and stress that we don't need to do that. So driving a hard line on, I am not satisfied with the status quo. As wonderful as our readiness is, and as wonderful that we've demonstrated our capabilities to the world, I'm not satisfied with that. And we're going to have to drive a new way of doing business that it can account for what it means to take on a near peer. And our grandparents figured this out. So it's not like I'm concerned that we won't. There's always room for distraction. There's room for excuses on not to get after it. But, how do you be the team that says, I'm deciding to stay focused on this. I understand when I'm distracted and have to come off to something else, but I've got the discipline that once that tyranny or the urgency is over, I'm going to come back on task and I'm going to deliver the readiness that this country needs. Let me say one more thing, and I know I'm going long on this answer here. It's extremely important that we look at those operational vignettes, real world that I played out, and then those exercise lineage that I laid out, And then we just do some good old fashioned commander business here. There's readiness tables that give you an opinion. There's performance in real world that give you an opinion. There's performance in exercise that give you an opinion. There's the day-to-day routine, data points that give you an opinion on readiness. But this is commander's business, okay? This is about commanders taking custody of their readiness, understanding the pure challenges that await us in this scenario, and then just deciding to take more risk, not being satisfied with the status quo, and moving out. And then understanding that we don't have to be perfect tomorrow. We just have to be better than we were yesterday, and string those betters together so that we move the ball forward significantly. Over.
Well, appreciate that. Let me ask you just a bit of a follow-up. How does operational discipline fit into that? Mission realities are going to involve putting your crews into some very challenging situations.
Yeah, I love that question. And this is one where, when I'm leading my wing commanders that we talk about, if you're a scientist on this, you're going to be greatly disappointed. So if you think you're going to attack this operational discipline with, some sort of calculus that's going to deliver you the answers, then you'll be greatly disappointed. So first of all, I thank you for the support after my memo came out. But that memo that was leaked was a series of 9, okay, that got after the heart of this operational discipline piece, okay? And so, there is a long-running conversation in this command about commander custody of the op, which is my way to say operational discipline. And, in our appreciation of the risk, and I kind of go back to, a Nimitz-esque. I'll completely put a citation on this one that it's not Minihan original thought, but the Nimitz approach to risk when it comes to if you can impose a cost greater than the cost you may be that may be imposed upon you, then feel free to close on the enemy and kill. That's an extreme paraphrase. I understand that. But that's the same way that we get to operational discipline and risk. If the training that you're accomplishing puts us in a better position to be successful in delivering the maneuver that this country needs to put the lethality in position of advantage to deliver for this nation and the coalition and the joint team, then I want you to take the risk. But I'm not interested in taking risk recklessly. So, we've got, really it's one framework, but I'll explain it 2 ways when it comes to this risk. And, I've got examples, when it comes to the pilot plus one that we did, when it comes to the long missions that we're doing, the max endurance operations that we're doing, missions that are in the high 30s and the low 40 hours of execution, is that, the first thing is you've got to understand every aspect of the risk. You've got to dig down well beyond just the regulatory guidance that says you can't do it. You've got to understand the guidance, the effects, the most dangerous, the most likely. You gotta really understand, what risk is involved here. Risk to mission, risk to timeline, risk to force, the likelihood of the outcomes. You've got to mitigate as much as you can. And there's thousands of ways to mitigate risk. And then you've got to own it. Okay. And own it in a fashion where you truly own it, not in a fashion where you're giving the risk to someone else. Just because I told someone I'm doing this doesn't mean that they're then responsible for the risk. So this understand it, mitigate it, own it is extremely important to me. Another way to say that, and I learned this from the SOF community when I was at Indo-PACOM, in some of the briefings that they do, and they call it if and then. If this is the case and I do this, then I have the probability of this outcome. So this commander custody of the op, and I've got one of my orders that paid particular attention to this, was that my expectation is commanders are doing commander business and they are approaching the risk and the opportunity in the terms that I just laid out in terms of operational custody. Let me throw another thing that concerns me. This is especially true of my 10 years in the Pacific, working at USFK, Indo-PACOM, and PACAF, and slugging out in joint environments, especially. The risk of the status quo is very rarely analyzed. Okay. The counter argument is very rarely analyzed. The counter argument normally comes at you in a worst case scenario, and I call it the Red Ryder BB gun. You'll shoot your eye out. So if the counter argument doesn't have the same discipline and scrutiny that your argument does, then the process is being let down. If the counter argument is always based in a worst case scenario, if you put one pilot and a boom operator in the right seat, you're going to have an engine cut at V1 and you're going to die. Then you let down the process. If we look at the status quo, if we look at the worst case, and those things don't have the scrutiny as the way forward, but have an alarmist approach towards being comfortably numb, in the status quo, then we're not going to be ready to offer that deterrent lens. And we are not going to be ready to deliver that decisive victory. So as I had that 10 years of experience and I watched people argue, I really try to pay attention to, are the counter arguments that keep you comfortably numb, are those just alarmist and worst case scenario based, and what's the real scrutiny there? And then just keep attacking and attacking and attacking and getting after that. But that commander custody, that operational risk, the mission type orders are all intertwined with each other and are absolutely bounded by the common denominator of all of them, which is trust. If we don't display our trust to our airmen on the line getting after the mission in the competition phase of this, then we will not have it when we need it most, which is in the crisis and conflict phase. So this operational trust that I got your back when it doesn't go right. This operational trust that when you call timeout, knock it off, no drop, go around, this is stupid. Any assertive statement, to stop and freeze so that we don't scrape paint or spill blood, that I've got your back and I will back you up before I even know what the details are, so that we create an environment where we're not doing reckless, that we're thinking through the things, but when things don't go right, that we don't use that as an opportunity to stop, that we don't give that ammunition for the naysayers to say, I told you so, that we keep being undaunted in our approach to getting after that readiness, then that's the place we need to be sooner rather than later. Over.
Thank you for that.
Yes, sir. You've said this before, and I'm really happy that you said it earlier. You talk about the notion of preparing for tomorrow's fight, and you've used the phrase explode into theater regarding how air mobility forces are going to need to operate. So can you expand on that? I know you mentioned it, and also what a future air mobility airman looks like in order to do this. Great question.
So explode into theater, is not just a call to the mobility team. It's a call to everybody inside the Air Force, certainly in the joint team. I'm approaching, I'm at 34 years of service. I've made a living off of moving the joint team for that whole entire career. And I've got an opinion on the joint team's ability to explode into theater. So I think you're tracking the two original problem statements that I couched. The majority of the efforts since my time here have been, bounded on two problem statements. The first is we're not ready to fight inside the first down chain. And the second is the joint team isn't as ready, integrated, or as agile as they think they are. So, this is a comment for everybody, this explosion. So if I drop, 6 C-17s at pick your base, any service, and those pallets aren't lined up and the vehicles aren't prepped and the paperwork's not done, then we're wasting the precious resources that we have, and we are not going to demonstrate America's readiness and America's will. On the other hand, if the cargo is lined up, the people are processed, the bus is loaded, and they're waiting for a C-17 that has to turn back for a maintenance problem, the same thing is true. We are not going to demonstrate America's will and readiness to explode into theater, and the joint team is going to fail. If the paperwork's not done, if the load plans aren't done, if the diplomatic clearances aren't done, if the HAZDECs aren't done, you name your bureaucratic approach to the systems that we have to do to make this whole thing successful, then that same lack of readiness is going to be demonstrated. So, this is about an ecosystem or an enterprise, if you will, when it comes to the explode into theater. And those operational examples that I gave you back up my concern, whether it's the Afghanistan ×2, the Ukraine, the Israel, and the exercises is too. So what we strive to do, especially when it came to Mobility Guardian, was really minimize the prep, minimize the amount of kit that we're taking into theater, and really just kind of have any potential adversary wake up and then America's on your doorstep. Okay. We are occupying the key terrain. We are there in sufficient numbers where you're aware of our presence, and the joint team is here along with us. So, whether it's Cruiser's team or Northcom equities, other Admiral Aquilino equities, certainly General Cotton's equities, you name it, that we're there in sufficient time and sufficient quantities to make a deterrent statement first, that we're not taking weeks, we're taking hours to get there. And we're coming there with everything we need to deter and to win decisively. So that is really the explode. You've got to, the way I described it is a potential adversary can't be told that the stove is hot. Okay. They can't see that the stove is glowing red. They can't feel the heat coming off the stove. They've got to touch it, and it's got to make them recoil. Okay. They got to feel it and recoil off of it. And that's the factor that we're trying to deliver with this explode into theater. So, and then there's the mechanisms that help us explode. So this is where these max endurance operations come in. If you do a normal crew day and you're a mobility airman, you're normally at about a 24-hour point, plus or minus a few hours, depending on the crew makeup and the airframe. But can I stop through Travis and get gas instead of have to spend the night? Can I stop through Hickam and get gas and a quick maintenance touch instead of stop and spend the night? And if I can do a 40-hour crew day and be, from Charleston to First Island Chain, that's a game changer. If I can do refueling operations differently so I don't have to shut the airplane down and run checklists 2 or 3 times to get back up and running. If I can understand the maintenance better and I can do the preventative maintenance instead of the reactive maintenance so that I don't have to have an engine stand pulled up and scrubs and all that other squibs and all that other stuff checked. All those things matter. And each 20-minute, 30-minute, 1 hour adds up to days if we don't hit this right. And so this explode into theater is a comment on the mobility team, the fundamentals of blocking and tackling. It's a comment on the joint team and their ability to actually be ready and meet their doc statements, if not earlier. And it's a comment certainly on our ability to join up with our partners and allies and theaters once they're there, because they want to know we're going to win and they want to know we're going to be there. And that assurance that we can explode into theater on their behalf is incredibly important. So I hope I answered your questions.
Well, sir, thanks for that. That obviously hit the nail on the head. We really appreciate the answer there.
Joe Minihan, what about the idea of connectivity in command and control? We often think about or hear about combined joint all-domain command and control for fighters and bombers, but I'd argue it's going to be equally critical for the air mobility force, especially when you think about moving supplies effectively and efficiently. So how are you thinking about this challenge?
Yeah, connectivity is my number one concern right now. And, you've heard me say I'm trying to work 25% of the fleet modified by 2025. It's extremely aggressive. That equates to about 250 airplanes across my entire fleet. The bottom line is the majority of my fleet has to key a mic and ask for situational awareness. And if that's the case, then we're going to be condemned to operate those airplanes the exact same way our grandparents did. We're going to have to occupy orbit points and rendezvous points instead of, being able to sense and seize the opportunities and the risk that's out there. So this connectivity is the biggest contributor to survivability and is my number one priority going into about the last 5 months of my command here. So I've got the data to back it up. When you look at that operational string from Afghanistan to Ukraine to Israel and now Gaza, I'm having the same challenges with the Gaza airdrops right now. And then certainly in the exercise, whether you go from MobeGuard 23 to the Bamboo Eagles and then already forecasting MobeGuard 25. So we proved in Bamboo Eagle with a roll-on kit and very unintrusive modifications to the airplane, meaning we can do these, at home station, that I can get line of sight beyond line of sight, secure comm, that can deliver the situational awareness that not just my team, it's good for my team to be able to understand the refueling and the cargo and all that. But it's better that I actually join the network and the link that the joint team survives and relies on. So, my ability to robust that network now gets me out of the maneuver battle management solely and gets me into the traditional battle management as well. We proved this at Bamboo Eagle. This might surprise you. An E3 broke and an E2 was going to come on station, and the connectivity that I'm talking about, which is roll-on kit, was able to provide not just the maneuver battle management, the thousands of decisions that need to be made before we even have the privilege to execute a kill chain, but also help with the traditional battle management. So we had an ABMer in the back with that connectivity, and it had an outsized effect on the battle space, exponential, to be able to, not only hold the net timing and other things, but to be able to have that traditional battle management. So, sir, I think you're spot on this, and we're in sync. This connectivity is, one, doable. It's value that exists now, and we just have to go buy it. Two, it's not crazy money. We're talking 200 million in 24, 400 million in 25, and then we can work what the 26th percentile in year 2026 looks like beyond on that. So these are absolutely doable things. This is about the joint force success. And if we don't make this connectivity, we're going to continue to have a scenario where the biggest threat to blue air is blue tankers. And it's the connectivity that gets us to a place where we are not the biggest threat, and we can service the demand that's out there and do it in a way that makes, our operational design successful. Over.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. I'm reminded of the opening night of Operation Desert Storm. I gave a presentation earlier today to AFRL, and one of the examples that I used was the fact that on that opening night, we had 161 tankers airborne. And the question is a potential dust up in the South China Sea with China going to be more challenging than Iraq was in 1991? I'm not saying they're equivalent or that those would be numbers, but that gives you an idea of the magnitude of the change. There are, not many folks who have had to put together a 3,000 sortie a day air campaign that are still on active duty. So all your points are well received. Again, a bit of a follow-up. What do you think about maneuver battle management, and how does that fit into this equation?
That's great. And then if I could just go back to your response there, the challenge here is that the tankers that serviced you in Desert Storm 30 years later are the exact same tankers with the exact same comm setup that exists today.
Yep.
So we have not moved beyond that. So that's what I'm trying to affect. Can I please just be able to join the link? Can I please have the connectivity that the rest of the force has? And then if I can get that, then I can best serve, the concept of employment that's going to be executed out there. So this maneuver battle management is intended to, one, highlight, the maneuver aspect of this. And I love it. This is a teammate of mine that got me to this statement here. So I'm not going to take full credit for this, but, amateurs study tactics, professionals study logistics, victors study maneuver. This is about maneuver. And in order to maneuver, we've got to have the battle management that does just that. How can I sense priority without having to squeeze a mic to do it? How can I take an Uber approach to refueling, where there's algorithms that help me understand the priority that lays out there? Who's going to go swimming if I don't get the gas to them? Who's in a critical min force package that if this falls out, that the whole package falls out? Who has the ability to keep the package going? All those intricate decisions that the kill chain doesn't need to be bothered with, so that the kill chain can run kill chain things, and that the maneuver battle management can husband or tend to, all the things that need to happen to make the kill chain successful. So that's what we're driving there. There is going to be an excess of ABMers and that tribe, that's going to need a place to stay while the E7 comes up. And I want them wearing AMC patches. If we do this roll-on capability right, I'm not saying it replaces an E3, but it gives us an ability to contribute to that battle management in a way that perhaps we've not thought about. getting back to the namesake of your institute, get back to effects base instead of platform base. I've got a lot of real estate on my airplanes that's underutilized. Okay. I've got room. If it means me living, I've got room to displace one pallet so that I've got the roll-on capability that can contribute to the battle management piece. So whether it's JADC2, whether it's, traditional battle management, whether it's maneuver battle management, it's all intertwined. This connectivity piece is the key to it. And opening up the mobility fleet to add to that, I think is going to be a critical key to the readiness needed to get into this AOR and be successful. Over.
You make some awesome points, and we're going to do our best to try to get those perspectives out there, because too often they're not recognized, and they are extraordinarily important. Not only that, they provide the overall force a great leverage. So again, you said it well, and thanks very much.
Thank you.
Well, sir, I want to pull some of these threads together, because you and your AMC team worked to train, evaluate, and purposely stress the air mobility team through a major exercise, Mobility Guardian, this past year. And got to ask, how did you design it? What were you trying to achieve? And most importantly, what did you all learn?
It's a great question, and the temptation is me to go on for another 30 minutes. I know, especially as I'm getting long in my career here, I'm talking a lot, but I knew very quickly coming in from my experience in the Pacific that we needed to move Mobility Guardian into the battle space, the battle skies, the battlefields, the battle seas, however you want to say it for the joint terminology, and that we needed to of the Pacific, we needed to integrate with all of the components out there. And so that was very early in my tenure that we made the decision to do that. And as you all know greatly, that's generally combatant command business. Combatant commands have either a J7 or a J37 with normally hundreds of people and decades of experiences doing the exercises that they do in theater. And we essentially gave it to a small team inside this headquarters and took an idea into execution in just a little over a year. So an incredibly talented team, an incredibly aggressive integration effort with all of the key enterprise stakeholders, and then just a decision to not be turned down. We did not have the money. We did not have the support. We did not know if we could pull that many airplanes out of the system and not have something come along like a typhoon, a hurricane, an earthquake, a coup, you name your event, a presidential travel, and not have it unravel it at the last second. So we just pressed the I believe button and went after it. We designed it intentionally to not drive towards success or perfection. We designed it intentionally to aggravate the gaps that we knew most likely existed, which were C2 oriented, which were navigation oriented, which were maneuver oriented, which were tempo oriented. So we drove as hard as we could to aggravate those things. And then with the clear intention, we talked about it earlier, to explode into theater, establish the hub and spokes, and then maneuver at tempo. So, we trimmed down our UTCs. We authorized crew days in excess of 30 hours. We trained to that. We wrote the spins that might be used in any potential scenario that gave mission command and authorities down to lower levels. We distributed those authorities. We rehearsed those authorities. We looked at it from an operator's point of view, a logistician's point of view, a maintenance person's point of view. And we tried to actually work out the spins that we would really use. We graded our ability to understand the risk. We did all those things, and then we integrated with the PACAF, the PACOM, the PAC fleet, the user pack, the MARFOR pack, the SOC pack, all that. And then we took a leap of faith because we knew that it wasn't perfect, but we just had to go for it and not be distracted by it's not exactly where we want it, and just execute with reckless abandon. And I'm extremely proud of what the team did. So we rehearsed it. We TTX'd it. We put giant charts and maps in hangars and on stages. We brought in the wing commanders and we made them do the walkthroughs, understand how what their actions were going to be, how their actions interrelated with others. So this is what I learned during my time in Korea and in the Pacific at the USFK and Indo-PACOM, working for soldiers and sailors, as we just did commander things and we made them rehearse and own it, and it paid off. So it was very clear to me, almost in the first 3 days of Mobility Guardian, that the AAR was going to play out along three major lines. The first was command relationships. The second was command and control. And the third, we called fundamentals at first, but we changed to explode into theater to better account for all of the equities. But those three things, generally played out on day three and maintained their way all the way through the exercise. And those three main AAR points have translated into 10 lines of effort, which we called a 10 line. And I've got a shot clock in my office now. It's on day 103. It's counting down to June 30th. And it's when we intend to have that 10 line down to a 0 line. The way you get off the 10 line is it's either in a normal state of governance where it can be sustained, through my command, or it's actually just complete. So I think we're down to 9 now. We might be down to 7 by the end of the week, but we intend to drive our hardest to close those gaps. Those gaps generally fall into 4 bins: data, decisions, development, and discipline are generally how we're getting after those things. So we made the decision not to be the team that had a lesson observed, to be the team that has lessons learned, and to close those gaps. And we're aggressively trying to do that. Over.
Well, sir, those of us that know you and your leadership style, I know you're not going to stop there. So what are your goals for the next major exercise to build off of Mobility Guardian?
Yep, already working hard at the MobGuard 23 team as the band is back together, Blues Brothers style. They're already grinding. It's not going to be the team that's going to be in place to do the majority of planning, but we've reconstituted the Mobility 23 team, and they're already getting after 25. En route to that, we've got Bamboo Eagle at the end of the summer, July, August timeframe. And then we got the normal exercise series that's going on in the Pacific now, and certainly in 25 as well. So how do you eloquently knit those things together so that they account for the Air Force equities, the joint equities, the coalition combined equities, if you will? So we're working that hard. We're gonna. If you think we made it painful on ourselves in 23, wait till 25. We're going to intentionally put ourselves in a position where, just like day to day, demand's going to exceed supply. We're going to have to make incredible decisions on priority. We're going to up the tempo. We're going to up the explode into theater. Enormous demand signal on everybody to be ready to do this. We're going to integrate with the Air Force effort, on the exercise as it plays out for what the big Air Force wants to do in the Pacific, interlay that with the joint equities, and make it incredibly hard. The way I'm describing it is, when it comes to some of the exercises being described as half-court basketball, we want full court. Imagine if I was going to support a bull inside the knitter where a tanker took off from lodges. Okay, that's the kind of full court that we're looking to replicate in the exercises moving forward. And then aggressively, right now, I'll put an enormous demand signal on my team to figure this out. Especially for Bamboo Eagle, I want every mobility aircraft in that exercise to have that connectivity, experimental connectivity, so that I've got varying degrees of hatches, varying degrees of antennas, varying degrees of roll-on kit. The industry has been exceptional in developing these, and there's 4, 5, or 6 of these out there. But how do we get them all in play? So one, we can get a comment on their performance, but more importantly, that we can show what can really happen with that maneuver battle management, that traditional battle management, the DAF battle network, all of it, and make a comment to a higher calling on JADC2 and other things, and really, really show what I think is going to be an exponential ability for the joint force to be successful if we have that connectivity. So other than that, in the next 5.5 months, not much going on.
Well, thanks for that, General. Now, how will the air mobility architecture need to evolve to support increasingly distributed operations? And here I'm thinking about the application of the ACE construct. You already mentioned, and it's a reality, that your crews are already spread thin. with the installations we've got in the Pacific, and ACE is going to significantly multiply the number of locations that you're going to need to include in your operation. So what's your thinking in this regard?
Yep. So I support everybody's agility concept. So ACE is not only something I'm supporting, it's something I'm doing. But the same thing is true for the Joint Force, whether it's, DMO for the Navy, EABO for the Marine Corps, MDTF for the Army. I'm going to have to be layered into all of the agility concepts when it goes there. An enormous effort here needs to be made to pull these concepts off of PowerPoint and get them into the robustness needed, either in a rehearsal or an exercise scenario. So I'm confident that we are making headway on that. But when I describe a mobility guardian and the pain I'm trying to put the force through to better ourselves, and I'm not talking about unfair pain. I'm not talking about pain that's so overwhelming that you could do something. But the intentional tension on these agility concepts, I think, is one that's needed most. The biggest, most fragile assumption that I'm making is that there is a entity working the command and control of logistics. And I'm not talking about blue logistics. I'm not talking about mobility logistics. I'm talking about purple logistics and combined logistics here. So how do we actually have the maneuver battle management that can understand where the fuel is, where the ammo is, where the tankers are, where the priority is, where the supplies are, name your class of anything. How do we understand so that we know that we're going to aggregate for lethality, disaggregate for survivability, and do that disaggregation in a position that does it to advantage? We don't disaggregate to run away. We disaggregate to an advantage. And that advantage has to have these concepts incorporated into them. So, I don't need to explain to you two gentlemen, this is PhD level stuff here. This is not the normal way that an AOC thinks about how we bring that lethality. So there's a lot of work that needs to be noodled through here. I'm confident we're going to do it, but that confidence is going to be bolstered by our ability to go out in a Bamboo Eagle, a Red Flag, a Wizent, any mobility guardian, any joint exercise, including the series that are going on right now in theater, and to stress ourselves to a point where we're learning some hard lessons, even at the expense of the traditional exercise objectives. I got to be firm on this. We have got to sacrifice the traditional approach to exercise objectives in the joint arena to get after the true things that we need to do to be that successful agile force, agile joint force, regardless of what the service bumper sticker on it is. We have got to get after that level of detail. It's going to make us uncomfortable. We're going to spend millions of dollars and not be successful. But in the aggregate or in the absolute value, we're going to move the force forward significantly. And I think we're going to learn a lot about ourselves in the process. Over.
Oh, thanks for that. Now, as part of Mobility Guardian, you spoke about lowering mission requirements to meet the realities of human endurance. Looking to the future, you've talked about how to raise human performance. Could you elaborate a little bit and provide your thoughts on that?
Certainly. The traditional approach is, when the human runs out, the mission runs out. And I'm not running away from the discipline and the custody of safe mission execution. And it's not a but. And we've got to figure this out on how we raise the human performance to better meet the mission demands. So this explode into theater, and we've touched on this. It's going to require that my crew stay up for 2 days, and I'm not interested in spilling blood and scraping paint. The time to do that is now. There's traditional approaches with pharmaceuticals on how to handle some of these mission endurance things, but there's also an amazing amount of technology that exists now, from programs that aggregate data into fatigue indicators, if you will, or energy indicators. These are apps and algorithms and programs, that are an aggregator, if you will. I'm wearing a wearable that tells me how tired or energized I am. If you talked to me 6 months ago, I had 3 things on me telling me how tired I was. And I'm down to 1 right now. There's wearable approach to this. There is a mindfulness approach to this. There is a coaching approach to this. There is certainly I'll give you an example. During Mobility Guardian, I was gone for 8 days. For 8 days, I ran around theater. I spent the night in a bed, and I put that spent the night in bed in quotes here, 4 out of those 8 nights. Okay. And 2 of those nights were for less than 4 hours. Okay. The other times I slept on a sleeping bag in the back of a C-17. Okay. And so, the traditional approach is to rig a hammock, to throw out a sleeping bag. And I think we can do better with what we give our air crew to sleep on. Some airplanes have a bunk. If you've ever been on one, it's not it'll challenge your definition of bunk and sleeping quarters. But how do we arm our air crew and those that support them to be able to, have an environment where they can make the best of the few hours of sleep that they get? How do I approach a mission where normally right now, if you were to sign in to an ops desk in a KC-46, everybody's crew rested to take off at that time. But maybe I need half the crew to go right to bed in the airplane and to not be rested. So there's philosophical approaches to this that come in. We hosted a human performance symposium here at Scott in December. It was very good. Lots of collaboration across the DoD, lots of collaboration with AFRL and other entities, lots of collaboration with industry, all focused on maximizing human performance. And I think we're going to continue to push this in a good way. And as you know, and I, our grandparents had to do this. We are going to have to figure it out. The time to figure it out now is in competition when we control all the factors. And I'm confident, I am absolutely confident that we're going to be able to move the human performance up. It's going to take a little money. It's going to take a little bit of a different approach, but I'm certain that we're going to be able to do it. Over.
Well, sir, AMC's fleet isn't exactly young. The C-17 was declared IOC over 3 decades ago. C-5s were procured during the Reagan administration, and KC-135s, as we talked about, they obviously need to be replaced. So what does modernization and that path look like for your command? Because, fighters, bombers, trainers, GBSD, CCAs, I could keep going on, JADC2, they eat up a lot of the modernization portfolio. So when do we reset mobility, and what are the attributes that you would like to see? And, I'm guessing more capacity and enhanced capabilities would be more than welcome.
This gets a little bit of what we talked about earlier, where we're generations behind. So, I think that the given is that's unacceptable. And if you are held hostage to the lowest common denominator when your force package, if that's true. And so we are, and so the traditional approach to recapitalization, the mobility fleet, is to only pay attention to it when something is failing. So think about flying the wings off the 141 in Desert Storm. Think about what happened to the E and the H model C-130s in OIF. So we are a wing crack away from having a fleet perhaps go down that similar fate. So how do you throw the cursors downrange and say, let's start thinking about what's next in advance of the failure? Let's us determine the sunsetting of an airframe instead of letting the airman or the airframe determine the sunset of the airframe. This is going to sound like I'm making it up, but it's true. We grabbed scotch and cigars and we went down to the old club here at Scott, and we just brought one afternoon on a Friday, a pleasant fall afternoon, and we said, if we were going to come back here in 100 years in a Dickinson-esque poem, The Ghost of Mobility Future, what would we want to see on the ramp? The reality is this. My granddad is an Air Force plank holder. Nothing on anybody's ramp in the Air Force would surprise him. He would say, that's a cockpit. That's where the pilot sits. That's where the co-pilot sits. There's the snacko. Here's the scheduler. I mean, there's nothing we're doing today that's any different than he was doing in 1943. So how do you deshackle yourself from that approach and say, hey, if we had a blank slate, how would we want the mobility fleet and be proud of it to look? Is the cockpit going to have 2 seats in it because it fits? Is there still going to be underutilized real estate on these airplanes because nobody's thinking effects instead of platforms? What can we do to be more responsive to the joint force? What can we do to be more responsive to the Air Force? How can we be a force that can get away into the more non-permissive environment? I'm not looking to take on roles that I'm not that I'm not supposed to have. But if any part of the Air Force team or the joint team is going to be inside the highways, then I'm going to be there too in some fashion. So, our approach was to take that blank slate out of that. Through about a year of work came, with two concepts when it comes to next generation air refueling systems and next generation airlift, which is basically a systems approach. That there's a lot of the kit that's going to look a lot like what we have today, that's going to operate in a permissive environment and be just fine. But there's going to be some kit that's going to have to straddle both the permissive and the non-permissive, and there's going to be some kit that has to get after a more non-permissive environment. I'm not looking to be stealth, but I might want to have some stealth-like qualities. I'm not looking to be VTOL, but I might want to have some VTOL qualities. And so really this open architecture, this systems approach, the cockpit can have two pilots, but it can also have a pilot and a linguist. It can also have a pilot and an intel officer. It can also have a pilot and an ABMer. It can also have a pilot and a navigator or somebody else. I mean, it can have tailor-made approach to how we design cockpits. So we're not just, just because it fits, we need to have redundancy there. It can have two pilots, but it can also have everything else. How can every hardpoint, hatch, and window have clean power and a clean way to get an antenna off the pipe? So you got clean pipes and clean power so that you can easily roll on and roll off capabilities. How can you develop a comm architecture that isn't out of date by the time it arrives on the flight line? And so that, if we were all to throw our iPhones down on the table that we had 10 years ago, we would laugh at each other. But that's the way we do comm on mobility airplanes. By the time it makes it through, all the things, it's already out of date by the time it shows up. I mean, we've got to do better than that. So, that systems approach, that open architecture approach, the maximize the real estate approach, and I talked about, hard points, windows and hatches, but, we could also talk about ejectables and palletized effects, including kinetics. We could also talk about common launch tubes. We could also talk about bringing our own spoof, our own jam, our own decoy, our own EW, our own collect. We could also talk about launching a UAS off that goes down and looks at the airfield that I'm about to land on. It could also fly down a rescue raft to a downed airman. It could also fly down a radio battery to a maneuvering Army element that needs to communicate again. So, to me, all these things are in the absolute realm of the possible. Getting InGas and InGal into the conversation was a big effort. They are firmly in the conversation. The challenge now is to get them into the resourcing, as sir, you alluded to. And I mean, it's the biggest concern I have is it's more money on top of things that already are gobbling up a lot of money. Gobbling's not the right word, but demanding a lot of money. And so, what we've got ourselves in a position now, and this is probably my biggest concern and probably an easy segue for you guys to ask another question here, but, what we lost is the integration. Okay, we lost ourselves in the integration here. So we were happy to develop 5th and 6th gen capabilities without mobility in the conversation. Okay, and so what you're going to have is a mobility that can't communicate with anybody else. And we've got to solve that. So moving forward, whether InGas or InGal survives, we've got to have this integration that drives that approach that our grandfathers did with the Buff and the 135. It was a systems approach. It was designed to be a conventional and nuclear system that could deliver what this country needed in terms of both types of deterrence. Okay. And it's amazing that our grandfathers still designed aircraft that are still relevant today. And it's our time to pick up that mantle, deliver that same integration so that the people that are airmen and on the front line 10 or 20 years from now aren't wondering why we were still asleep at the switch, 60 years into a weapon system carrying the weight for this country. I think we can do better. Over.
Well, sir, I love that you're challenging the philosophies, just as you're speaking. Of course, an intel officer could become a pilot, or you might have a pilot that's also trained to be a linguist, and they can do both while they're flying the jet. But I do want to pull on the thread, where you said, I'll call it the ghost of mobility yet to come. So how does a blended wing body tanker concept fit into this mix of everything that you've been talking about? Is this, about new airframe technology, or does it also tie into new ConOps?
It's good. So I got to hit a thing too, that, this automation piece for what you just said is incredibly important. So, automation allows humans to do what only humans can do. Understand the difference between a scared voice and an angry voice. Understand priority at greater depths than perhaps an algorithm can. Algorithms and AI, and I think people say it a lot just to sound smart, but we need to reduce variables so that humans can do what only humans can do. I mean, that's my drive when it comes to automation, AI, machine learning, algorithms, all that stuff. We need to drive towards these things aggressively, but we got to be really, I think, more nuanced than just saying, yeah, we need AI. But what do we need AI to do? And so I'm happy with the team here that we're working that into the future concepts as well. And that automation is an enormous piece. So, to me, the blended wing body concept is a great platform to push the boundaries of what mobility can be. So this is one, by blended wing, you already get some qualities of lower signature, I think that are outside of the tradition of the mobility aircraft with the big giant T-tails or the big Herc tail, the big radar cross section. So this blended wing body is going to allow us to do, I think, numerous efforts. It's going to have us, be able to start having that discussion on that systems approach when it comes to next generation airlift or next generation air refueling system, so that we can start talking about reduced signatures and we can push our ability to get into the more non-permissive environment. It's certainly going to make a statement on fuel efficiency. The more fuel I save, the not using myself, I can give to somebody else. And then, in terms of, what it's doing for, the test scenario that's going down, and I'm excited for it. I think it's going to give us a scalability to perhaps smaller approach. I mean, imagine if there's a big blended wing body that's a mother tanker, if you will, and you have a fire brigade of automated smaller blended wing bodies that can go forward into that high-res, right? That can go forward into that extremely contested, and they can just bucket brigade fuel to the strike package, to the rescue package, to whoever needs to be in there grinding it out in the highly contested parts. So I'm excited to what blended wing does. I got an effort here, hopefully in the next 5 months, where I get to go visit the work they're doing. So I see, something that was probably initially taken on as a fuel efficiency concept has many more attributes that it could bring into the conversation. Over.
Well, sir, at the recent Air and Space Forces Association Warfare Symposium, the Department of the Air Force's senior civilian and military leaders unveiled sweeping plans for reshaping, refocusing, and reoptimizing the Air Force and the Space Force. So how does Air Mobility Command fit into these plans? And, what major changes do you see for mobility air forces going forward?
Air Mobility Command has been getting after the NDS and the reoptimization, reshaping, the prioritization of the challenge since October of 21. So everything that has been worked on by the Department of the Air Force and was announced at AFA and beyond has been absolutely complementary and consistent with the way Air Mobility Command is going. So strong Air Force leadership in this endeavor here, and I'm grateful for it. So I don't say that to be coy about who was first or second. I mean, my successes are born from the Air Force effort, from everything from 21 forward. But this consistency and this complementary style is absolutely what needs to happen. So, when it comes to, we talked about integration in the last answer here, delivering that integrated approach to bringing on new capabilities, I'm all for it, and we need it. This is you might be uncomfortable, but look what the status quo has delivered us now. I don't think anybody can be super satisfied with the status quo. When it comes to the exercising that's going to be done and the approach to readiness and the funding of the critical canals, all those consistent and complementary to where we're going. So I'm excited for the Air Force endeavor. We just can't coming back from a conference in DC last week. The momentum is growing. The depth is building. The unity of effort is becoming more and more focused. And so I think we're extremely excited to be along with this journey. When I talk to my team, the mobility team, that has been grinding this out since October, I simply say, keep doing what you're doing. There's some mechanics up at the headquarters that are going to make your life easier, both from AMC and Department of the Air Force. And then there's some institutional things that are going to change that make our ability to not only win with the force we have, but to develop the force that we need. All those things are going to come together more eloquently and more crisply in an extremely good way. Over.
Well, sir, I know we're getting tight on time, but you've got 6 months left in your tenure. So what are your goals?
Well, I already told you I've got a 10 line. My goals are to close Mobility Guardian 23 and be the team that actually closes gaps and doesn't just admire the problem. Within that 10 line are all the things, everything from the discipline to the data to the decisions to the development. The 25 by 25 is in there. I want to tee up the next commander to have irreversible momentum on the hard-fought gains that this team has delivered, and not in a way that condemns the next commander to the exact course of action that I took, but allows the next commander to understand the context, the governance, and the structure that keeps this momentum going, so that there's rudder adjustments and not brake lefts and brake rights that are needed to keep this mission moving forward. I want to set the foundation for all of the Mobility Guardian and exercises that are going to happen in 25, because the time to do that is now. So I want to do the early push-ups by the staff on what's needed to make the joint team, the Indo-PACOM team, the PACAF team, all the other players, all the other, all the combatant commands, all the other components successful for 25. I really do feel that 25 is a gift. If we can get to 25 and be able to do the exercise that we need to do, that is a true gift to this nation and to the like-minded nations of this world. If we can get that done, I want to establish a firm toehold on resourcing needed to do all that stuff. Talk is one thing, following up with money is another thing, and that's the real heart of the matter here. This is a resourcing issue in an environment that's extremely challenging. Everything from the continuing resolutions, the lack of budgets, all the way to the competition for other MAGCOMs, component MAGCOMs that have important things to do as well. So I'm not lost on, how hard this money aspect is. It's a part we take incredibly serious, and I'm relentless on in my battle rhythm, both internally and externally, when I go and try to influence those that make the decision. I'll end on this and I'll turn into a crybaby as I'm losing my voice here on the interview. The day after my retirement will be the first day that the Air Force is known without a Minihan officer in its ranks. And I want to, I'm laughing, not booing too much. I want to savor every second I have left remaining and enjoy this mission, enjoy the airmen, and enjoy what has defined 4 generations of Minihans, and not ever take that for granted for the next months and for my remaining life. So there you go. Crybaby at the end. I'm Irish, so I'm not scared to cry in front of people that I don't know. But that's how powerful this journey has been to me. And I take it for the gift that it is. And I want to be standing on that stage without an ounce of energy left in my soul to give to this nation. And then I want to give my bride the freedom that she deserves. Over.
Well, General Minihan, this has been an absolutely fantastic conversation. We cannot thank you enough. You put your heart and soul into this, and this is quite evident. Not only what you've done as commander of Air Mobility Command, but across the span of your entire Air Force career. So we can't emphasize enough what a difference you've made. The tone you've set is game-changing, and you've set an example that I hope every Air Force listener here will take forward as an example of what leadership is all about. So thanks very much.
Hey, thanks. And Commander Minihan is back. Hey, listen, I don't ever for 1 second doubt that we are going to win this thing. So, this is not just the best Air Force on the planet. It's the most lethal force on the planet. And, we can always get to a better place. But the courage, the professionalism, the ability of this Air Force is not for once in jeopardy. We got this. We need to make it so overwhelming that one, they never want to take us on, and two, if they decide to do it, that it's the worst decision they ever made. Over.
Awesome, sir. Thanks again for coming out today. It was really, really great to chat with you.
All right. I enjoyed it. Cheers.
With that, I'd like to extend a big thank you to our guests for joining in today's discussion. I'd also like to extend a big thank you to our listeners for your continued support and for tuning in to today's show. If you like what you've heard today, don't forget to hit that like button and follow or subscribe to the Aerospace Advantage. You can also leave a comment to let us know what you think about our show or areas you think we should explore further. As always, you can join in on the conversation by following the Mitchell Institute on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, or LinkedIn, and you can always find us at mitchellaerospacepower.org. Thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Stay safe and check 6.